Alright, now I'm going to talk a little bit about the applications for the Chum Kiu form, the second form. Chum Kiu means seeking the bridge, and the bridge is the forearm. Now we call that the bridge because that's what I have to cross to get to you, and that's what you have to cross to get to me. Now, in the beginning of the form, we start out exactly as Sudim Tao form starts. Hoi Sik section is the same, Sup Ji Sao, Quan Sao, that's all the same. That is so that you can link the forms together. Later on, you're going to leave off the end of Sudim Tao and the beginning of Chum Kiu and do them together as one long form. So the first movement that is really any different than Sudim Tao is the first punch. Chua Ma Yechi Chun Kiu, or stance pivot with the straight character Sun punch. Now, what I do, it's very important that you understand the very first movement because it teaches you the cue or the secret to pivoting. What happens is, I have the same stance that I had in Sudim Tao. That means my heels are out wider than my shoulders, my knees are bent, and I can't see my feet. So when I go into that first movement, what happens is I actually pivot that foot so that it matches the angle of the other foot. See? What I don't want to do is pivot on the ball of my foot, which would make my stance shallow and make me lean back, and my whole stance would be off balance. So from position, the very first movement is to turn that foot and keep it bent in the same way as before so that you can't see your front foot. In other words, my foot maintains the same bend and alignment. The only thing that's any different is it pivots out on the heel, and that adds pivoting power to the punch. Now this introduces us to what's called Chua Ma, or sitting horse, pivoting stance. What I do with the Chua Ma is turn, and I want my toes to move as fast as possible. I turn my feet to the same angle as each other, which is based on the Yi Ji Kim Yang Ma, or the basic stance. So I pivot and get power through my waist, through my hips, and into my movement. So in this case, it's a punch. Now at Sudim Tao level, you just punched with the arm using your wrist, elbow, and shoulder alone. In Chum Kiu, you're learning to take and add body power to that punch. Now we use the Chua Ma in a lot of drills. For example, what we call Kyun Shu Kyun, or fist parries fist. When Gavin goes to pivot punch me, I pivot punch to stop his. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and like that. We use pivot punch in a lot of the other drills as well. Like for example in the lap self cycle, here we're using the pivot punch in what I call the Bu self switch. Here, pivot punch, and then we're cycling again. So what I did was I went Bu through, pivot punch, and then again, cycling. Alright, next I'm going to talk about after I finish the second punch and pull back. That footwork is called Jing Ma. It means to straighten the stance. We use it to mean to turn the stance back to the center from the side. Now normally we think of our fighting position as being turned sideways to the opponent. This pivoting of the stance introduced us to that. But there are times when you would use Yi Ji Kim Yang Ma in a fighting situation. It's just not used the way you might think at first. Now, for example, if I were open with Gavin and I had thrown the rear punch at him and he blocked it with Wu Sao, in a situation like this, I might not want to do a complete pivot of my stance because if I did, I'd be turning my back to my opponent. We wouldn't really want to do that. So in a situation like that, that's where you might want to use your Jing Ma because you would then get a little bit of pivoting power, but you wouldn't turn your back on the opponent.